without plants, we would not live at all. So plant medicines are used for virtually every purpose that we need from a health standpoint.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Food Matters podcast, your home for nutrition, health, and wellness education. My name is Laurentine. I am a filmmaker and a nutritionist and the founder of foodmatters.com, and I'm here to hold your hand on this journey to optimum health, transformation, and emotional healing. Thank you so much for coming on today on the Food Matters channel, and we are having a masterclass with you today to talk about plant medicine. Known as the medicine hunter, Chris Kilham's purpose has been to promote natural plant-based medicine, protect the natural environment, and support Indigenous cultures. Chris is a medicine hunter, an author, an educator, and TV personality who has conducted medicinal research in over 45 countries and lectures worldwide about holistic medicine and botanical medicine. So let's think about this. You're sort of like an anthropologist and you're also like a medicine hunter. Could you please explain to a lay audience, a lay person, what exactly is plant medicine and how does it differ from conventional medicine that we would receive when we go to a GP?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Well, first of all, plant medicines overall are the most widely used medicines on Earth and always have been. Human beings and plants of all different types have co-evolved since the beginning of life. And we share chemistry with plants, we share biology with plants. For example, the antioxidants in plants that protect them from premature destruction due to exposure to heat, light, air, moisture, and time are the same exact substances that protect the cells of our bodies from premature death. Plant medicines have been used for as long as there have been human beings on Earth, and proto-humans too. And there are about 50,000 or so plants that we know of that have been used medicinally. And they might be used for something as simple as seasonal allergies, to relieve constipation, or for something much more serious. Many plants are the sources of chemotherapeutic agents that are used to treat cancer in hospitals. And childhood leukemia, for example, is treated typically with vincristine or vinblastine, which come from the Madagascar periwinkle. So plants play a critical role. Plants play a critical role in everything that has to do with human life. We eat them, we drink their juices, we wear their fibers. This is a cotton shirt. We build homes out of them. We heat our homes with them. We adorn ourselves with their fragrances. We decorate with their flowers. And we breathe the oxygen that plants give out. So nothing is actually, you could argue that water and sun are more essential to survive, but without plants, we would not live at all. So plant medicines are used for virtually every purpose that we need from a health standpoint. And how they differ from many of the so-called conventional medicines is that most or many of the conventional medicines are wholly synthetic. We did not co-evolve with Prozac. We did not co-evolve with Prilosec. We didn't co-evolve with Klonopin. We did co-evolve with all of the plants. So, there's tremendous toxicity associated with conventional medicines, which doesn't mean that they're not of value, but plant medicines are by far more widely used on planet Earth by more people, and they're far safer as well. So that's a little bit. Ask me anything you wish.
I love that. And you're talking my language. This has been our premise at Food Matters here for the last 20 years. And we've been researching and interviewing people like yourself for the last 20 years for the documentaries and the films and also for the summits. But it's beautiful what you're saying. And it really goes back to the ancient premise of you are what you eat. And the Hippocrates is saying, of, first do no harm.
Sure.
So plants really are the basis of our medicine for many
Hmm.
centuries. So let's hone in on, I'd like to talk about anxiety, depression, stress, factors that we see in our modern world as quite debilitating and also leading to illness and modern disease. What can the plant world, how can it help us in these critical conditions,
Well,
stress
you're
and
you're
anxiety?
in the
What can we do about it in the plants?
you reside in the Pacific Islands, and probably the greatest plant for anxiety, which was the first thing you mentioned, is kava. The root of kava. I'm sure you're very well familiar with it. There are many human clinical studies showing that kava is every bit as effective for helping to basically manage mild to moderate anxiety as any drug out there, but far safer. So, kava is a great one for anxiety. When it comes to depression, depression's a very complex thing because it may be due to circumstances, it may be due to imbalanced biochemistry, it may be due to the intake of you know, drugs and other things that can alter brain chemistry in undesirable ways. There are many botanicals that are widely used and increasingly so for mild to moderate depression. And I always want to say mild to moderate because when you're talking grave depression, that suicidal depression, that's where neither the plants nor the drugs really show any efficacy at all. But rhodiola rosea, which is a root that comes from Asia, is phenomenal for depression. And in fact, a growing number of psychiatrists around the world choose to give their patients a rhodiola extract before turning to something like the SSRI antidepressants or some of the other aggressive drugs. So, rhodiola is very good for helping to manage mild to moderate depression. Um, if depression is due to very low energy, then some of the other energizing botanicals like Panax ginseng, I think most people have at least heard of ginseng. Um, or Shazandra, which is a berry. These can be of enormous value as well. Um, in terms of stress overall, probably one of the very best things is ashwagandha. Weird name, I know. Ashwagandha comes from India, where it's been used for over 4,000 years that we know of. It's the root of the plant that is used. And right now, there are probably, I'm guessing around 50 or so double blind, placebo controlled human clinical studies showing that ashwagandha root and its extracts helps to reduce and relieve stress. And you sort of get that kind of feeling. A lot of what we experience as stress is high levels of stress hormones in our bodies, especially one called cortisol. And while people don't have to remember all of this, the point is that when cortisol, which is something that we need to live, by the way, just as we need cholesterol to live, but when cortisol is too high, it produces feelings of irritation, of stress, that tight nerve feeling. And when you take ashwagandha, it brings cortisol down to a normal, healthy level. So after a certain point, you just go, oh, wow. It's almost like getting off of an angry horse. You feel relaxed, you feel relieved, and interestingly enough, you typically have more energy. So I'm a big fan of ashwagandha. I've worked with it longer than I'd like to admit, actually, since the 80s, really. It's a phenomenal botanical. Also, something else that is wonderful for relieving stress is holy basil, not regular culinary basil, but holy basil. That also comes from Asia. It helps to lower cortisol. It helps to provide a sort of a feeling of relief. And when people have a good experience with plant-based medicines, um, then they know this is real. Very often, we're so bombarded by commercials and propaganda and hype that you need to take this pill or that pill, or ask your doctor if the purple pill is right for you. All of this, when people find out that plants are very, very effective if you get good products, then generally they tell a lot of other people who then try it and also typically get good results. So we really do have things for anxiety and for mild to moderate depression and for stress.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And so I need to ask the questions for the audience, for those that are, and I hope you guys are all taking notes, because I love this work. But for those that are still a little bit on the fence, and perhaps been a little bit brainwashed as well by the way that we talk about plant medicine, is is there a certain way that you can take a plant and it can be dangerous? Like, for example, if we're saying, take kava or take ashwagandha, can you overdose on it, or what sort of limitations or restrictions are there with plants, just in general, as a question?
Look, you can overdose on carrots for real. A bunch of years ago, a woman overdosed and died on too much water. She was drinking 10 gallons of water a day. She killed herself. Um, so, yeah, sure. But within the parameters of what's typically recommended, plant medicines are very, very safe and offer low toxicity. Now, look, there are some plants out there that are highly toxic. I mean, datura, for example, or brugmansia, which have beautiful bell-shaped flowers. You consume a tea of those, or the seeds of those, and you can get terribly sick, and or you can die. There are toxic plants out there. You don't want to eat poison ivy. But with something like kava, for example, um, the people in Vanuatu who drink kava would drink on a nightly basis the equivalent of what you would get in a supplement in a month's supply. And they do it every night of their lives, and they do it for decades, and they're fine. So kava's not really something to worry about as long as you have a product made from the roots. The above ground parts of kava, which native people do not use, have some toxicity. So part of knowing plant medicine, certainly if people are working with these, administering these, making preparations of these, is understanding what parts of the plants work, how much, when to utilize them. Um, it's very convenient now, though, I have to say, that we have such very good science, because now we can say, okay, if you're taking, let's say, ginkgo to sharpen your mind, and it does so by enhancing circulation in the fine vessels of the brain, we know that certain concentrations of extracts of ginkgo leaf, uh, taken on a regular basis, actually help to do that, to sharpen the mind. So science, one of the things that I find admittedly frustrating is that people who do not know this area will say things like, well, there's not really much of any science on this. There are hundreds of thousands of studies on medicinal plants, because remember, they're the most widely used medicines on earth. Far more people use medicinal plants than use synthetic drugs. I mean, if you take an eucalyptus cough drop, you're using plant medicine. For real. If you drink peppermint tea to quell an upset stomach, you're using plant medicine. And of course, you can utilize plant medicines for things that are more serious than that. You take senna, you're going to move your bowels, pure and simple. You take aloe and put it on mildly burned skin. It'll help to soothe the skin. One of the things I have done in my career is gone out at the behest of companies and found new cosmetic ingredients. Ingredients that regenerate skin by enhancing the formation of new collagen, for example. Plants do amazing things internally and externally. So if you follow the directions, if you get good products, and getting good products means getting recommendations from people who really know what they're talking about, then you can come to very little harm.
That's so beautiful. And it's true. I mean, I've lived and worked in the Pacific now for almost 20 years. And, 20 years ago, you wouldn't have been able to find a kava kava product on a shelf in a pharmacy, right? It was still backwaters. But
Hmm.
now, with the advent of people like yourself and the research that is being done, you can actually get a lot of these plant medicines in our local pharmacies, or even in supermarkets these days,
Right.
so it's amazing to see the information that is getting out there
Sure.
for people.
It happens to be the case that the popularization of plant medicines happens without the billions of dollars of promotional money that the pharmaceutical companies spend. You take something, it helps you to get to sleep because you've had trouble getting to sleep, let's say. You tell your friends. Some friend of yours says, "Gosh, I have so much trouble getting to sleep. Maybe I'll try that." So they try ashwagandha, they try lemon balm, they try something. It works for them. They get a great night's sleep. They tell their friends. The popularization of these, while there is tremendous science behind them, largely happens as a result of grassroots conversation versus the many, many billions of dollars that the pharma companies spend on doctors visits and promotional programs and TV advertising. That's not largely what our industry really does.
It's true. And so, going back to the indigenous people, which is something that you've done yourself, and listening to their stories and looking at the way of their life, how would you say they're dealing with stress and anxiety and depression, for example? Do they go to plant medicine, or do they just live different lives so that they don't necessarily have these type of issues?
Well, okay. I live in the United States. We consume more antidepressants, more anti anxiety medication, more mood modifying medications than all the rest of the world put together. We have a sick, crazy society. People are nervous and upset about everything big and small, and they're gobbling drugs like M&Ms. My experience with indigenous people around the world, whether they're people in the Amazon rainforest, people in Congo, people in Vanuatu, people in the mountains of Thailand, is that if they have adequate food and shelter and safety and freedom, then they're just not as stressed as people in the so called developed areas are. They don't fret about the same things. They're much more relaxed. I mean, maybe they could say, "Oh, I went out fishing today. It wasn't a good day. I didn't get that many fish." You know, but um, we manufacture as a result of competitive society and the urge to have more. We manufacture a lot of mood disorders for ourselves. So I think the latter thing that you mentioned, that they live differently, again, assuming that they have their basic needs met, um, you know, they don't need these things. I mean, the first time I ever went to Vanuatu, which was in 1995, I was on Pentecost Island, living there in a village with people, and I just saw a bunch of really joyful people who were very relaxed and strong and healthy and capable and fun to be around, and children who didn't hit each other and didn't throw tantrums and just seemed to have a good time with each other. And it was wonderful to see. And my experience with Native people around the world is that if they do have their basics met, they are much more free of mental and emotional disorders than we are in the so-called developed world.
Isn't that interesting? And so, going back to the discussion on ashwagandha, would you say that the experiences that you've had in India, where ashwagandha is made or is harvested, is that a place where people are using ashwagandha in this way?
Well, they use I mean, women use ashwagandha for sexual and reproductive health. I have had a number of medical doctors in India basically say, no woman walks out of my office without ashwagandha, because it's that good for helping to maintain healthy sexual and reproductive function. So not everybody's taking it for stress. Yeah, some people say, I take it because it gives me a better night's sleep, a more sound sleep. I don't wake up in the middle of the night. I go to sleep more easily. Um, I think that in the United States and in Europe, people tend to utilize ashwagandha more for stress. I don't really see that same use as much in India. Ashwagandha is very, very widely used for energy and strength and endurance and stamina, for improved athletic performance, all of which are verified by modern human clinical science. Although, of course, those have been traditional uses for thousands of years. And I want to make a point here. People don't use something for thousands of years if it doesn't work. They don't have any incentive to do that. None at all. If it doesn't work, they move on. But I do think that the uses of ashwagandha are different, let's say, in India overall than they are in the United States and Europe when we're frantic with stress.
Very interesting. Okay, let's talk about another very popular food, medicine, which is cacao. Now, I mean, we as women, let's talk about women's health. We tend to get stressed around our periods, or there's times when we're feeling low and we reach for chocolate, right? Yay, let's get to the cupboard. And sometimes we find ourselves having, if we're educated enough and conscious, we are finding ourselves having those chocolate bars that are like 80% cacao because, we know how good it is for us. Could you elaborate on the potency behind cacao and the raw ingredients behind it as well?
Sure. Cacao, which yields what we know as cocoa beans, which are used to make chocolate. Cacao is one of the healthiest things you can possibly put in your body. It is more loaded with nutrition, with protective antioxidants, with anti inflammatory agents, with cardiovascular enhancing agents than any other food I know. No exceptions whatsoever, not one. I spent some time with the Kuna people in the San Blas Islands of Panama. They're very, very poor there. And what they have is cacao. So they make a beverage out of cacao. They actually take boiling water and they throw in bananas and they boil the bananas and then they mash them up. And then they add a huge amount of cocoa nibs, which are the insides of the cocoa beans. They come from the pod, which is called the cacao pod. And with the final drink is very thick. It's almost like gravy, and that is their primary food. And Harvard University and other medical centers have been studying these people for decades now because they have no incidence at all of heart attack, stroke, high blood pressure, and 16 common forms of cancer. So, and that is due to the unusual flavanols and phenols and other protective compounds in cacao. For women who are craving chocolate when they experience a change in mood around the time of their periods, um, chocolate has profound mind and mood modifying properties. It contains dopamine, which is a compound that we manufacture in the brain that is very satisfying to us. Anything that gives us pleasure does so in part because our bodies produce dopamine around that. So, making love, we produce dopamine. Eating a good meal, we produce dopamine. Getting a great massage, we produce dopamine. Um, so, as a mood modifier, chocolate is very, very good. And you mentioned something like having 75 or 80% cocoa solids. That's really what you want. Then you're getting a super concentration of the nutritional components of chocolate, say, versus milk chocolate, which may only have 20%, cocoa in it. So it turns out that cacao, which produces cocoa beans that we use to make chocolate, is in fact one of the very absolute healthiest substance you could possibly put in your body. And I know that's good news. I know there are people right now going, really? I mean, I'm going to go out and get some dark chocolate. And yeah, go out and get some dark chocolate. Please do.
And what are other ways that you see the cultures of these traditions using cacao?
Well, I mean, I've been in Ecuador where they've made a drink similar to what I saw in the San Blas Islands. Water, bananas, lots and lots and lots of cocoa nibs, all blended together and cooked and drunk again, thick like gravy. I mean, mostly it's a very enjoyable thing for people. Um, in the Amazon, they'll take cacao and they'll make sort of cakes. And I don't mean cakes that you eat like with flour, but they'll make these hard cakes of the cocoa, and then they'll break off a hunk or take the whole thing and throw it into water. Or in the case of cooking in Mexico, they make mole, a sauce out of it. Um, there, we are inventing um, what we like to call traditions around the ceremonial use of cacao, which really hasn't existed since the early Maya, since the Olmec. So some people actually, make a heavy duty chocolate and they have some sort of a ceremony around it and shake rattles and do that kind of thing and burn incense and drink this stuff. And that's fine. But you really don't have to do that. You can just plain enjoy your chocolate as you wish.
Very interesting. And so, in your travels, in regards to, we're going deeper into the I guess, the illness and the incidences of ill health that we see in the modern world, especially in the more, I would say, first world. Depression. Let's talk about what ways that the plant medicine world, we talk a lot about, yes, I went to do a journey or I went to do a plant medicine ceremony and I helped to understand more about my body. And I had an experience that was something very different than I had experienced ever before.
Okay.
When you traveled to these type of countries that talk about this, what did you find there?
Well, specifically, I think you're talking about the psychoactive plants and fungi now. So we've taken somewhat of a leap forward here. In the Amazon, for example, when people are mentally or emotionally sick in some way, or maybe they have an illness that they're just not recovering from, very often they'll consume what's called ayahuasca. And ayahuasca is a very powerful psychoactive beverage made from made from a vine and a leaf together, boiled together, and you drink very, very little of it. I mean, maybe an ounce or so. And it will take you on a significant journey in which you may have wild and lavish visions. I've sat in about 135 or so ayahuasca ceremonies. I've brought hundreds of people to the Amazon to experience ayahuasca. And the majority of them have, as a result of that, either overcome a trauma of some sort, a physical ailment that just nothing else worked with, like chronic fatigue, chronic stomach problems, other things, even pain of different types. Um, Many people wind up engaging in some of these ceremonies and then being much more free in their minds and hearts. Right now, we're seeing a global revolution in the utilization of various psychedelics. Ayahuasca is one. The so called magic mushrooms are another category. In the United States, one of the most famous clinical studies was done with terminal cancer patients at a major medical center. These are people who are going to die. There's no going to cure them. There's no radiation or chemotherapy that's going to save them. There's no treatment that's going to save them. They're going to die. And they were given psilocybin, which is the one of the active components in magic mushrooms. And virtually every single one of them lost their fear and anxiety of death, which is remarkable. Many described having the most significant spiritual experience of their entire lives. There's another plant medicine used in Gabon and other parts of Africa called iboga. Um, a compound from that was used in the United States for decades for getting people off of opiates. And today there's a revival in the utilization of iboga or its isolated compound, ibogaine, exactly for treating addictions, which it does very, very well. So we're seeing people who are either utilizing these ceremonially, which is something you mentioned, or even just personal use. I mean, there's a whole emerging field now of psychedelic assisted therapists, people who will sit with you in a clinical setting while you're on a journey with typically with magic mushrooms, but maybe something else. But that is not the only way to do it. Many more people now are, utilizing these things in natural settings, in the woods, in fields, with friends, on the beach. And this also is genuinely healing and refreshing. And when I use the word refresh, you know, um, life is hard, and there are lots of things that influence us and can stress us, and sometimes our schedules may be burdensome. And when you can do something that refreshes you genuinely, body, mind, and spirit, that's a marvelous thing. So we're really in a renaissance now with these agents, and we're not doing them the way people did hundreds of years ago, living in caves and in the jungle, because that's not our lives. But we are taking advantage of very significant traditional wisdom that goes a long, long way back, to refresh ourselves, to overcome mental and emotional disorders that maybe don't respond to anything else, and also for purely for spiritual discovery, to explore the vast, seemingly limitless dimensions of the human mind, which is a wonderful, wonderful pursuit.
Wow, it's really amazing to hear a researcher like yourself to talk on this level, and just like we didn't see kava in the pharmacies 20 years ago, and it was something that you really would only see in ceremonial ways in the traditional islands, maybe these ceremonies and the psilocybin and the ayahuascas that are today available around the world, mostly in indigenous cultures, may also be one day seen in a pharmaceutical environment. And like you said, you even have pharmaceutical companies approaching you to do the research and to find out which exactly, are the components we should be using and which one we should avoid. So do you believe that is something that we will see more of in the future?
Well, actually, there are many, many pharmaceutical companies around the world that are working with these things. And for me, that's a two-edged sword. I mean, I get invited to speak to the pharmaceutical companies, Merck, Pfizer, GlaxoSmithKline, Roche, those types of companies. And I always have a good experience, and their scientists are very, very smart. But, you know, disassembling these things, in my opinion, is not the way to go. Uh, People will talk about the psilocybin molecule being the thing in magic mushrooms. Well, there are hundreds of compounds in magic mushrooms, and they actually have co evolved and grown into this perfect whole. And isolating something, the magic silver bullet theory, I believe is a mistake. I don't want the pharmaceutical industry to own psychedelics. I mean, I don't think they ever will. I think the cat is way out of the bag. But, you know, uh, many people will only take comfort in being given something in a clinical setting. And I do understand that. But in terms of the world at large, millions of them are utilizing magic mushrooms, ayahuasca, LSD, other significant psychoactive agents. We haven't even gotten to cannabis. And they're doing so on their own. They're doing it in friends. They're doing it in circles with people. They're completely outside of the medical system, as they have been for thousands of years, and mostly doing just fine, thank you. So I don't want to see the pharmaceutical companies hone in on a molecule and say, aha, that's it, because that's not really true. Um, you know, uh, it's like saying, what's healthy about an apple? Is it the water? Is it the pectin? Is it the vitamin C? Is it the colorants in the skin? No, it's the whole apple. The apple is what's healthy in an apple. And the same thing with these psychoactive plants and fungi. They actually achieve a sort of a perfection, if you will, um, in their natural state. Just as you can derive something from cacao, you can take the flavanols from cacao and put them in your body. It's not the same thing as eating cacao, which has at least 815 naturally occurring compounds that we know of. So I'm not a fan of isolating molecules. I mean, I understand the science. I understand the science extremely well, but I'm all for the whole plant and the whole fungus.
That's exactly right. And I love that concept of not taking anything out of its context and really seeing it for its holistic form. And I feel like that is probably as well where the world is going. Even like we're seeing kava root in pills in a local CVS or a pharmacy where it is distributed through pharmacies. However, it's still in its whole form, its whole component, and untouched and
Mhm.
unadulterated and perhaps not bleached, or it hasn't been gone through a processing facility. So, which is really amazing, which I find very exciting because that was not happening 20 years ago or even 10
Right,
years ago. So,
right.
hopefully, we will be able to see a lot of these incredible, like we're calling them, plant medicines,
Hmm.
psilocybin, as well as different forms of ayahuasca or different forms of the fungi in its whole form, in ways that we
Hmm.
can access more readily, and to also have administered in a safe and controlled environment.
Sure. And even think about something like lycopene, which is the red in tomatoes. Would you rather have a capsule of lycopene, or would you rather have a good marinara? Okay. I mean, your choice, but I'm pretty sure you'd say you'd rather have a good marinara sauce. Um, you know, and yes, these things like lycopene capsules, I mean, they have their purpose and they're valuable and all that, but um, the closer we can stay to the natural thing, whatever that thing is, the better off we are. And it's like the difference between a cup of coffee, coffee also is spectacularly healthy for you. The studies on the health benefits of coffee go on. There are thousands of them for real, long-term human studies showing that populations of coffee drinkers live longer, have lower rates of suicide, have lower rates of, bowel cancer, lower rates of, a whole variety, hosts of problems. Would you rather have that or caffeine tablets? Of course you'd rather have the coffee, because it has the other 700 or 800 hugely beneficial compounds in there, and the aroma and the flavor and just the experience of sitting there with the cup and taking that in. It's we are our senses come alive with these things. And when we isolate molecules, when we reduce things down, when we take the nature out of nature, our senses really don't respond. There's nothing to respond to. So yeah, I'm a big fan of the whole thing.
So let's talk about brain health. So, in regards
Hmm.
to brain health, we're seeing a lot of incidences now of early onset dementia, even to the ages of 50, 45 now, where we're losing our brain, we're losing the capacity to remember, to digest well with our nervous system. And would you like to, from a plant medicine's perspective, would you like to touch on this, on what things we could do that are out there for us in the plant medicine world to help reduce the cognitive decline?
Well, first of all, we know one of the most significant factors that contributes to cognitive decline is loneliness. If people are lonely, they're more likely to go into cognitive decline early. There are innumerable chemicals in the environment. I mean, infants upon birth have about 200 industrial compounds in their bodies, in their blood, PFAS and trihalomethane and aromatic hydrocarbons and so many more things. And these affect brain function. So a lot of what we experience is a result of exposure to toxic materials in the environment that are very, very hard to get away from, nearly impossible. Um, Poor diet, diet lacking in adequate nutrition, highly processed foods, too much sugar, bad fats. These all contribute to poor brain health. There's no question about it. The science is in on that. So before we even get to the herbs, um, one of the most critical things you can do is drink pure water instead of garbage sodas. Um, Eat natural foods, preferably organically grown, so you're not taking in pesticides and fungicides and herbicides that can contribute to abnormal brain activity. We know that to be so. Artificial colors and flavors that do the same, things like aspartame, um, and and part of the revolution in self care is learning exactly what we need to do to keep ourselves in good condition, and it really does start to a great extent with food. We know that exercise is extremely important for maintaining good brain function. Conversation with others, reading books, the science on how these things enhance cognitive function and help us to maintain healthy cognitive function longer. The science is very good on this. For people who are concerned about their brain health, uh, one of the great brain enhancing agents, ashwagandha, which we mentioned before, there's a berry that comes from Asia called schizandra, and the studies on its capacity to enhance short-term memory, long-term memory, executive function, clarity of thought, thought formation, mental alertness. It's extraordinary, just extraordinary. And Schizandra is a very, very funny berry. It's not a berry that you would put in your cereal. It's sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and pungent all at the same time. So you take a fresh Schizandra berry and you put it in your mouth, you don't even know what to think about the flavor. It's almost like crossfire across your tongue. It's so strange. But the science on it's excellent. Um, Panax ginseng, very, very good for sharpening the brain. Turmeric root, which is the yellow in curry spices. Turmeric root shows extraordinary value for helping to keep the brain healthy. And oddly enough, consuming a lot of turmeric root on a regular basis reduces the accumulation of plaque in the brainstem. And plaque in the brainstem is associated with Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative diseases. It doesn't mean it causes it, but it accompanies these. Um, so those are some things that can be done, staying active, exercising, having good conversations, reading, staying alert, doing these things, not drinking lots of alcohol. If you don't have to be on antidepressants, don't be on them. These things tend to fog the brain. All of these things can help you to keep your wits about you longer. And we certainly want that. Nobody wants to lose their memory and look at loved ones and not know who they're seeing or forget every other thing. Nobody wants that. And much of the best advice for keeping a healthy brain and keeping a sharp and alert mind is lifestyle advice and not necessarily any particular herb at all.
Well said. Yes, for sure. And for those that are listening right now and that are going, yes, 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 this is interesting because, these are all anti-inflammatory, just like we're talking about foods that are anti-inflammatory. So like you're saying, reducing the plaque out of the
Mhm.
brain. Wow, that's really interesting. So, one of another question that I wanted to touch on with you are gut health. So, in many cultures, we see literally cultures, and that are cultured foods, or we see kafirs, or we see the little microbiomes, right, that are found in sauerkraut. Could you tell us a little bit about how, or even examples of different cultures and how they use good, healthy gut bacteria to repopulate the gut flora, and to reduce the incidences of leaky gut?
Well, sure. I mean, yes, I would say that fermented foods, throughout much of Europe and throughout much of Asia, are better established traditionally than, well, certainly in North America. Um, South America has a number of beverages that are, you know, basically that have different naturally occurring bacteria in them that are good for the gut. Um, I was several months ago at a conference in far northeastern India, and a man gave a presentation on cultured foods. And for example, something like tofu or tempeh or miso. These are soybean products that are inoculated with certain cultures. But he went on to make the point that when you analyze these traditional foods, not made in a factory, let's say, but made traditionally, that they not only have the bacteria, the microorganisms that they're inoculated with, but they also take in dozens or maybe even hundreds of bacteria that are in that particular region and in that particular environment. So, for example, what might be very good for gut health in Switzerland could be entirely different than what's good for gut health in Korea. um, we do see people eating a lot of cultured foods across Asia. And Of course, in places like the Caucasus region, it's sort of famous for yogurt and kefir, as you mentioned, cultured milk products. But also keep in mind that we're talking about milk products that come from animals. That this is not factory farming. This isn't people with thousands of cows or thousands of goats. Generally speaking, these things are homemade. Sauerkraut, yes, you can get it in a store, but sauerkraut's largely homemade. Kimchi in Korea, the cabbage dish that accompanies every single Korean meal, it's cultured and fermented, and that is something uniquely beneficial to the people of that region. So we do have a lot of cultured foods, many, many dozens at the very least. The trick is for example, Asian people in general do not tolerate dairy products well. Doesn't matter if they're cultured or not. So you're not going to see Japanese people, for example, typically having kefir. It doesn't help their digestive tract, it makes them cramp. They're much more likely to be utilizing miso, which may be a largely unfamiliar taste to, let's say, people in Scandinavia. So the regional cultured and fermented foods have arisen in those areas for good reasons, either because people do tolerate those particular foods better than they might in other cultures, and or the microorganisms that ferment them are unique to their area where they live. Does that help at all?
Yeah, no, I love the way that you answered it, because you're right. There is a lot of bio individuality in regards to what works for you as a person and your heritage and perhaps your lineage, as what may not necessarily work for somebody else that has a completely different lineage and has grown up with different types of
Mhm.
foods. And their body for centuries, their DNA is just not used to
Mhm.
those type of foods. And then when they do consume them, like the dairy products in the Asian cultures, their body actually breaks out, and they breaks out with psoriasis, or they can have all sorts of pimples or acne on their face. And this is the thing: if we don't know where our ancestry or where our roots lie, then we may not know how to look after ourselves properly in regards to self-care.
Right, right. But I would say in general, having some fermented and cultured foods in your diet is very smart, helps to replenish the extremely important beneficial bacteria in the intestinal tract, in the gut. And, you know, um, people take antibiotics. I used to, long time ago, I was a nutritional counselor, and people would come to me and they'd say they were having digestive troubles. And very often I would say, when did you take antibiotics? And sometimes they say, oh, I didn't, I haven't taken them. I mean, I had some a year ago. And I'd say, oh, when did your troubles start? Maybe a couple months after that. Very often people take antibiotics or anti-inflammatory drugs, that produces intestinal problems. And I'm not saying that antibiotics don't have a role in human health. I mean, I have had instances in which antibiotics have been greatly beneficial to me. Fortunately, only on rare occasion, but the widespread use of different drugs does, in fact, gravely damage the gut flora, and that can lead to leaky gut and other things. And it may or may not be readily or easily repairable with cultured foods.
Yes, that's true. Can we also talk about women's, I guess, sexual health, reproductive health? We're now seeing a lot more issues in regards to hormonal disturbances. Now, in your research, and especially visiting different cultures where these perhaps these incidences are a little less dominant or more rare, what have you found? What type of plant medicine have you found are potent in this field?
Well, again, I mentioned that obstetricians and gynecologists I've met in India have said no woman gets out of my office without ashwagandha. It's tremendous for helping to enhance the overall health of sexual and reproductive system overall. But also, you know, pharmaceutical drugs can be gravely damaging to sexual and reproductive health. Highly processed foods can mess up your hormonal balance, sometimes beyond repair. um, Many of the things that we are so used to that we just think, well, how could they possibly, cause that much harm, are actually the primary harmful agents. And additionally, we have we have hormone disrupting herbicides in widespread use on food crops. And these are extremely damaging to the sexual and reproductive health of women and men. That's why we see a rise in, reproductive system cancers in both women and men. So, again, part of it is eating clean, eating organically. Eating organically is not an elite thing; it's a stay alive thing. There's no justification for consuming pesticides, herbicides, fungicides if you don't have to. And I realize not everybody either has access to good organic foods or has the income in places that are very developed. Now, in my travels to places that are not as developed, well, organic foods, that's just what people know. They're not using pesticides. They're not using these kinds of things. So the big problem in the less developed cultures really is hygiene and sanitation. That's why we see higher levels of babies dying around the time of birth. That's why we see women often suffering infectious complications, simply because they don't have adequate sanitation and hygiene. But from a reproductive system standpoint, if they're eating natural foods and they're drinking clean water, then assuming that the hygiene is good, they're generally in pretty good condition.
Mm. And so, just for our female audience that are probably wondering if these horny goat weed doesn't actually work, is that a medicine or is that a joke?
Horny goatweed is something that I worked with in the 90s. I went to China and investigated it. It's good. It's good. I mean, if you really want something that lights you up sexually, the Malaysian herb Tonkat Ali, Tonkat Ali, Ali, that's the thing. I mean, that will make you get up and go. That's really something. It is vastly more sexually arousing than horny goatweed. Horny goatweed's good. There's some good clinical evidence on it, but there's a tremendous amount of clinical evidence for Tonka Ali. And it's kind of funny, too, because Malaysia is a Muslim country, and in Muslim countries, they tend not to talk about women's sexuality as though it doesn't exist. Um, but in fact, the most significant benefits are shown with women. So Tonka Ali is something that's really, really excellent for women's sexual and reproductive function, as is ashwagandha again. Um, and men who take Tonka Ali find that very often, if they're having erectile function problems, that can be aided. Uh, we see, as a result of exposure to toxins in the environment, we see so many problems. learning disorders that are attributable to different kinds of poisons in the environment, sexual and reproductive disorders. Men in general, there's been a steady and consistent decline in sperm production and motility over time and sperm volume. Very often when a couple can't have a child, it's blamed on the woman. It's got to be something wrong with her fertility. And at least half the time, and perhaps more, it really is due to the man. And that is due largely to, agents in the environment that we're exposed to on a regular basis. I mean, don't smoke tobacco. Just don't. It's foolish. There's no benefit to it. It will harm you in every way. It will degrade your health overall. But other than that, I mean, as clean and as close to nature as you can go is going to be your best advice. And drinking beverages like green tea, for example. Green tea, one of the healthiest fluids you can put in your body. Very good for your cardiovascular system, very good for your brain, very good for your immune system, anti-inflammatory, profoundly antioxidant, so cellularly protective. And it's just simple green tea. It's so easy to make a cup of green tea. So there are many things we can do to aid our health that aren't extravagant, that aren't difficult, that don't require, whatever going to Kathmandu. There are lots of things we can do at home and just within our daily lives to improve our chances of staying much healthier longer. A Hawaiian elder I saw at a conference, 25 years ago, said a beautiful thing. He said, true healing puts into order the body, the mind, and the spirit with the past, the present, and the future. The more broad we can think, the more holistically we can think about all of this being, the composition of who we are, instead of dissecting it. Well, I take this pill because I got an ache here, and I take this pill because I got a something here, and I take this pill because I got a ha here. That's not healthy thinking. That's not healthy thinking at all. And that's not a realistic or a long-term strategy for actual health. We must eat well. We must drink pure water. We must exercise. And also we need friends. We need love in our lives. Without those, people just plain get sick, and it doesn't matter if they're eating organically. If you can, be in a great relationship, or even better, if you can be in scads of great relationships with friends and family, all the better. You'll have a better life overall, body, mind, and spirit.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's been such an incredible interview, and we're coming to the end of it now. And I just wanted to thank you for sharing your wisdom, especially, bringing out all of these beautiful wisdoms from other cultures and then dissecting it and then bringing it in a holistic way to the world. So thank you. Thank you for all that you do.
Well, thank you, Laurentine. It's a pleasure to be on with you, and I love the work you're doing, and please continue to spread the word far and wide.
So yes, thank you everyone for listening. I really enjoyed that talk. I hope you did too. And there will be more of these on the Food Matters podcast. So head to foodmatters.com and see you again.